In this lesson, we'll learn about Maya Sculptiformer. The Sculptiformer is a very neat tool for adding volume or bulges inside of the mesh it's connected to. So we'll experiment with our piggy bank. With it selected, we'll head over to Create Deformers and choose the Sculptiformer tool. Let's go ahead and take a look at its options, and we'll reset the settings. So at the top, we have our sculpt modes. Flipped, what this is going to do is cause our mesh to kind of flip as the sculpt sphere starts to leave it. But it's nothing that's abrupt. This is actually a really neat tool for bulges. Next we have project, which will cause the mesh to project along the sculpt sphere. And then stretch, this is another good one for keeping the volume inside of your object as you transform your sculpt sphere. The inside mode, this is how your inside points will be affected by the sculpt sphere. So ring is going to create more of a type of ring offset on your points, and then even will create more of an even distribution. Max displacement, this is your sculpt magnitude, so as you start to increase this, it's going to push your points out even further. Then we have our drop-off types for controlling how smooth or how rigid the effect is going to be. So with none, this is going to be a very rigid result. With linear, we'll get a linear smoothness. And then we can control that smoothness by the drop-off distance. Now the last three, positioning, grouping, and the sculpt tool. Positioning, this is going to center your pivot or center your sculpt object on the object that you apply it to. If this is off, your sculpt is going to be automatically applied to the origin of your scene. We can group the sculpt along with its origin locator together using the next option. And then the sculpt tool, this is what is used for, let's say, using a NURBS or polygonal object as your sculpt sphere. Now this is a bit unstable, so we won't really cover this. But we'll go ahead and take a look at the other options. Let's go ahead and choose Create. It'll almost appear as if nothing happens. However, go into wireframe mode, you can see your sculpt sphere. Alright, so we'll go ahead and start to move this around just to get an idea of how this behaves. So this right now is how stretch works, and this is really neat. Almost as if something is pushing inside of the mesh. I'll go back to shaded mode so we can clearly see that. Again, this is a really neat tool. You can get very creative with it. So that's basically what stretch does. If we were to go ahead and take a look at our outputs, we can control our displacement and drop-off distance from the channel box. So as we start to increase that displacement, we're going to create a stronger bulge. And then we can smooth out the effect by adjusting the drop-off distance. Now there are more tools we have, or more attributes available with the Sculptiformer. Pretty much the same settings we saw in the option box. So we can access those settings from the attribute editor. So underneath the Sculpt tab, we can go ahead and switch our mode. So right now, again, we're under stretch by default, but we can set this to, let's say, project. Notice how the mesh is going to now project along that sculpt sphere. Might want to decrease your max displacement just a little bit more. And then you could also adjust your drop-off distance to control how intense that's going to be. And next we have flip, which is going to cause your mesh to kind of flip as the sculpt sphere leaves it. So this is almost like a bubble effect. You can get very creative with this. We're just, of course, skimming the surface. But as we learn the tools and as we start to use them more and more, we can become more creative with how we use them. And then we can go ahead and switch our inside mode. Again, ring is going to create more of a convex, or in this case concave, pushing effect with our points. So we start to pull that sculpt sphere out, but as we start to bring that in, we get more of a concave effect. Or we can get more of an even distribution using the next setting, which is set by default, even. All right, now watch what happens if we take our drop-off type and set this to none. The result is going to be much blockier. If I were to take the sculpt and start to scale this, just to push these points a little bit further, you can see how rigid the result is with the drop-off type set to none. However, setting it back to linear, that definitely smooths out the deformations. Then of course you can control your drop-off distance, again, to kind of smooth out the result or to create more of a pull. Now underneath we have our Sculpt Advanced attributes, and this is really neat because with this we can use a texture to get even more creative with the deformations we're able to achieve with the Sculpt tool. But again, that's a look at the Sculpt Deformer in Maya. Great tool for adding bulges or volume inside of your mesh. We actually use this in our insect rigging course to create a type of sliding effect on the insect's exterior as he pulls out or pushes out rather his thorn. Let's say if he's going into attack mode.